In the previous video, we have created our first React functional component and rendered it successfully onto the web page. But if we take a look at it, it's pretty much static in nature. That is, it always displays the same hello world heading when rendered onto the DOM. But the whole purpose of front-end frameworks is to be able to render dynamic data to the DOM elements as needed. Until now, we haven't used any dynamic data inside our React components. That's what the goal of this section is. We are going to take a look at how we can pass some dynamic data to the components that will eventually get displayed onto the DOM. Okay, let's get started. So firstly, I'm going to remove these chunks of code which we no longer be using, and this one over here. Okay, and let's comment out our app variable to remove the warning on the console. That's fine, we are good to go. Okay, in our component function, or we can say functional component, instead of directly printing the hello world greeting message, we can accept some variable that holds the greeting message as our argument to function, like this. And instead of displaying hello world, let's render our greeting message whatever we receive from outside. So I'm gonna remove this hello world and I'm gonna write my greeting message whatever we received from outside. Okay, let's save it and head on to our browser. And we can see now it's showing greeting instead of hello world. But that's not what we intended to achieve. We wanted to render whatever that's inside our greeting variable. Anyway, we haven't passed our greeting variable though. Let's discuss in a moment how to create and pass it from outside to our component. But firstly, this is JSX code that transpiles to React.createElement call, as we discussed it a couple of times already. To tell Babel transpiler that greeting is not a string, but it's a JavaScript expression that needs to be evaluated, we need to enclose the variable in curly braces, like this. All the JavaScript expressions inside JSX must be inside curly braces so that transpiler can distinguish it as a JavaScript expression inside JSX. Okay, our component is now able to take some input from outside. If we have noticed so far, we haven't done any functional component invocation directly. I mean to say, we haven't anywhere invoked our component function like this, just like how we invoke our normal or standard function. Component function or functional component is invoked by React internally. We can't invoke it like this. Okay. To pass the arguments or properties to the component, we can use React.createElement or its shorthand JSX syntax. Let's see how we can pass it through JSX code. There inside our JSX code, first we tell the property name and set it equal to some value, whatever we intended it to assign to. So I'm going to create a property by name greeting and I'm going to set its value to hello world, like this. So here greeting is the name of the property and its value is hello world. This greeting property will be passed to our component at the time of its invocation in a special argument called props. As we discussed already, we are not going to invoke our functional component. React will do that internally for us. Just we mentioned that these are the props that our component should get at the time of its invocation. So after its invocation, my component will receive a special property as its argument, which is an object called props. And everything that we pass to the component inside JSX from over here will be inside our props object. So the first thing that I need to fix is to replace this greeting with props. And for a moment, let's log our props property to see what we have inside it. And let's remove this greeting variable over here because we no longer have access to greeting. And let's save it and flip over to our browser. We can get to see our props is an object containing greeting field with its value set to hello world. Okay, we can remove the log over here now. And to access the greeting field inside props object, just write props.greeting, just like how we access a field inside our object. And since this code is in JSX, we need to wrap it in curly braces like this. Okay, let's save it and head over to our browser now. And this time we can see it's correctly showing hello world greeting message. Let's quickly change the greeting message to hey there. So over here, I'm gonna change its value to hey there. Let's save it and flip over to our browser. And we can see now our new greeting message, hey there, is being rendered. So this is how we can dynamically send data from outside to our component. And inside our component, we get to access the pass data through props object. These HTML looking attributes that we pass to our component from over here are considered as props. Keep in mind, while accessing data or to write any JavaScript expression inside JSX, we always need to enclose it in curly braces. We can pass multiple attributes from here to our component by just separating them with space or with new line separator. All of them will be initialized as fields inside our props object, and we can access them inside our component by simply using props.the field name or the property name. Let me demonstrate this. Let's say we want to throw some CSS style color for our greeting message. So I'm gonna create another prop by name color and set its value to, let's say, green. Notice that this is still JSX and we are setting our prop name color to some string literal green. And we discussed that JavaScript code inside JSX should be in braces, right? But when assigning a string literal to our property, we don't need to follow this rule. It will implicitly keep braces for us. So this is identical to keeping our string literal in braces, like this. But for simplicity, I'm removing the braces as of now. Okay, let's wrap our h1 element within a div element and we'll apply the color style over to our div. So I'm gonna create a div element and inside it, I'm gonna paste my h1 element like this. Okay. Now let's create a style object inside our component. So I'm gonna create a variable by name style and it's an object. Inside it, it's going to contain a field by name color and its value is set to whatever color we passed from outside. So I'm gonna write props.color. Okay. Now let's create a special prop style inside our div element and assign our style object what we have created just now to it like this. Special prop, I mean the property which React understands and processes it. By passing style prop to a React element, we are saying to React that this is a CSS style which I want you to apply over the corresponding HTML element on the DOM. In other words, we are saying, hey React, apply this style for me over the div element on the web page. Okay, let's just save it and flip over to our browser now to check the output. We can get to see some nice green color is applied to our header heading, right? Okay. Another way to write it would be, rather than creating a separate style object, we can set it in place like this, right here itself inside our style property. So I'm gonna create a field by name color and I'm gonna assign its value to props.color. Okay. The outer braces here are for JSX to recognize it's a JavaScript code and inner braces signifies it's a JavaScript object. So our style property will eventually get assigned with an object containing field color with value props.color, which in our case is green. So this way of initializing our style property is termed as inline styling in React, since we are creating the style object in place over our React element. Okay, let's save it and check the output on the browser now. It's the same green color over our heading. Okay, we have successfully demonstrated passing multiple props to our component and also saw a bit of styling in React. We can use a component multiple times in our application. Every time we want to use a component, all we need to do is we just need to create a React element of it, either using JSX or create element method. Okay, let's say I want to render another component with greeting message hello world and color blue. All we need to do is to create another React element by simply writing our component in JSX again. So I'm gonna copy our component in JSX code and I'm gonna paste it over here. And this time I'm gonna pass different prop values to it. So our greeting prop value will be hello world and our color prop value would be blue. Okay, let's save it and check onto our browser to check the output. And we got an error. It says adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Okay, before we try to fix the problem, let's see what went wrong. Let's see how this JSX code actually looks like after transpilation. I'm gonna copy this code over here. I'm gonna paste it. And this code in JSX is going to get converted to react.createElement with first argument as component and second argument would be the props object with the fields initialized to whatever we mentioned inside JSX. So it will contain greeting field with its value initialized to hello world and it also contains color field with its value to blue. Okay, and since we haven't mentioned any children for our component inside JSX, the third argument would be null. So this code in JSX will also be converted to a similar way. So I'm gonna remove it. I'm gonna copy our react.createElement code and I'm gonna paste it over here. And this time would be different prop values. So this prop value would be containing hey there and our color would be green. Okay. React.createElement returns a React element, which is a JavaScript object with fields as type and props properly initialized. And since we have two React elements over here, we are essentially saying pass object1 and object2 as our first argument to our render method, which is not a valid JavaScript syntax. So we are actually saying pass object1 and object2 to our first argument of render method. We can't just pass multiple objects in a single argument to a function. So we need to wrap object 1 and object 2 inside another container object before passing these React elements to our render method. So the fix is we need to wrap our component inside a container like div or span. Let's wrap them inside a div. So I'm gonna remove this code over here. This is just for demonstration, and let's cut our component code in JSX. And let's create a new div React element, and I'm gonna copy my component code in JSX inside it. Okay, and let's save it and head back to our browser. And there we go. We have successfully rendered our component 2 times with different props. The point is, we need to pass only a single React element to our render method's first argument. In case if we want to render multiple React elements on the UI, then we have to wrap them in a top level div element before passing it to render. On the same lines, we can't also return multiple React elements from a component. From our functional component, I'm already returning a div element here. Suppose if I want to return another element, say h2, with the same content as of our greeting message. So I'm gonna write props.greeting inside JSX in curly braces. Okay, I can't keep it here outside of my div element like this. It's just as if we are returning multiple React elements. One is a div and other is a h2, which is a violation to the JavaScript syntax that we can at most return one JavaScript object from a function, since these are also eventually going to be transpiled to create element calls that returns a JavaScript object. To prove that this is an error, let's save this and head over to our browser. And we got the same error as of before. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So we have to make sure we return only a single React element from our component. To make this work, we have to move this h2 to inside our div. So I'm going to cut this from here and I'm going to paste it inside my div element. Let's save it. Now everything should work fine. Let's head over to our browser. And this time we can successfully see h1 and h2 displayed for both the components. Let me pull up a diagram over the screen so that we can understand and visualize better about components, props, and how they are associated with each other. This diagram explains what components really are. Components are just like normal JavaScript functions that accepts data through a special property called props, and finally produces React elements or views that describe what we want to render ultimately to the DOM, or to say correctly, virtual DOM. You can ignore the word virtual DOM right now. I'll explain it in the later sections of this course. Also, we haven't seen class components as of now. It's just for the sake of correctness that I mentioned here, objects. We'll also discuss more on class components in a while. So components are just special type of functions that returns objects, which React uses to produce some view on the UI. Looking at this behavior, it seems like it's a kind of following the famous producer-consumer pattern. Our component consumes props and produces some view. Very fitting, right? Okay. Moving forward, I will use this producer-consumer analogy sometimes because React, ES6 features, and Redux uses this producer-consumer pattern quite effectively. Okay, on to the next slide where we will see some actual code and output. So we have a very simple poster component here that consumes an URL property and produces an image view using React element that ultimately renders our image to the DOM or web page like this. Notice that props to components are identical to what arguments to a function are. We pass props to component using JSX or React.createElement. We have just seen how we can pass props through createElement method also. We have to create an object, initialize the property fields inside it, and pass it as a second argument to our render method. Okay, so props are just a way to pass down some data to the component, just like arguments is the way to pass input to our functions. And there is a common formula or notation that is being quite famous in the React community to explain how components and props are associated with each other. It looks like this. F of D equal to V, where F is a component, D is props, and V is view. To put it symbolically, we can write component accepts props and produces view. So we are passing props to component, and in return our component is producing some view on the web page. Here this poster component and even our component function in the code accepts props and returns a React element that produces some view. We call such components as functional components because they are literally just JavaScript functions. Okay, before we wrap up our discussion, let's sum up all the things that we have learned so far in this section. We have learned about what are props in React and how they are associated with a component. Props provide our component a kind of interface through which it can accept some data from outside and use the data to produce React elements that gets ultimately displayed on the DOM. Another point is Any JavaScript code in JSX must be kept in curly braces, but we don't need to use curly braces for strings. Then we have seen how to pass multiple props to our component both in JSX as well as through createElement method. And we have tried a bit of CSS styling also in our component. Then we have discussed about why we can't return or pass multiple React elements because they are just JavaScript objects. As of today, a component must exactly return a single React element, but this is going to be fixed using the new feature fragments in the next major version of React, which is version 16. When we code today, we have to put unnecessary divs or spans just to wrap multiple React elements. But from version 16, we'll be able to return an array of React elements from our component, eliminating the need to render unnecessary divs or spans over the UI. Then we discussed that React components follows a famous producer-consumer pattern since it consumes props and produces views on the web page. Alright, let's move on.